On May 20th, the day after Ruby Rose's exit from Batwoman, Warner made another announcement. And this one wasn't treated with complete indifference. After long last, the mythical Snyder Cut of Justice League will be released on HBO Max next year. In this editorial, I will very briefly recap exactly what the Snyder Cut is and what it isn't. Why releasing it wasn't on the table before, what changed to facilitate its release now, and why you, in the end, will be getting another Snyder Cut than the one you've been clamoring for the past couple of years. As long-time watchers of the channel will know, we have been speaking of the Snyder Cut since before it was even given the moniker the Snyder Cut. The name is slightly misleading, so let's begin by going through what the Snyder Cut is and what it is not. To do that, we will need a very brief history lesson. Snyder's original plan was to make Justice League a two-parter, but then Batman v Superman was unleashed upon the public. If they had put the extended cut in theaters, then maybe things would have been at least somewhat different. But no, they put the damn near unwatchable theatrical cut in theaters. And the audience recoiled from it. That caused Warner to freak out and react by changing course. And they had to do so fast, because there was less than a month between Batman v Superman's release and cameras rolling on Justice League Part 1. To facilitate this change of direction, Zack Snyder, up until then chief architect of the DC Cinematic Universe, was demoted several times over. More critically, the rushed decision was made to truncate the planned 2 Justice League movies into just one. Hence, Justice League Part 1 became Justice League full stop. Then they just had to see about where to follow up the story afterwards. With weeks to go before filming commenced, the 2 scripts were rapidly spliced into one. That's incidentally when that whole post-apocalyptic Mad Max Batman storyline teased in Batman v Superman went out the window. And then the ensuing 1 script had to be further retooled and tweaked to even make sense while the movie was filming. On top of that, it also had to be made funnier and more lighthearted, and to this end, Snyder's vision was further compromised by the notes from the producers, led by Geoff Johns and Peter Berg, the 2 who had been brought in to replace Snyder as the chief architect of DC on film going forward. After principal photography had concluded, they had notes which led to a first round of reshoots which were helmed by Zack Snyder himself. And somewhere in all of this chaos is the Snyder Cut. That is the cut-off point, because after that first round of reshoots helmed by Zack Snyder, rumors started coming out that the DC executives at the time thought the movie was unwatchable, and it was apparently Geoff Johns that had the bright idea to bring in Joss Whedon for a new rewrite and a second round of reshoots, and then things escalated from there. As such, the Snyder Cut is something of a misnomer, because it does not represent his original vision. Snyder's vision was Justice League Part 1, to be followed by Justice League Part 2, and neither of those were ever filmed. What was filmed was Snyder's vision forcibly truncated into one movie, and further compromised by Peter Berg and Geoff Johns' notes. But it was still filmed by Zack Snyder. Due to all the interference it nonetheless was subjected to, the pre-Whedon cut might have been a more apt description than the Snyder Cut. But that's the moniker it goes by, so let's stick with that. As we now know, the Snyder Cut is indeed coming, but the events that led to it coming now only begun 6 months ago. 7 months ago, there was virtually no way it would ever happen. Let's explore why and what changed. There is nothing wrong with doing reshoots to salvage a movie. Plenty movies have been salvaged this way, but in the case of Justice League, it quickly became clear they had made a mistake. The whole purpose of retooling the movie several times over, and even bringing in Joss Whedon to that end, was to increase audience and reviewer approval, and subsequently increase the box office earnings. That's why they did what they did. But despite the immense cost incurred in that retooling, which made Justice League one of the most expensive movies ever produced, the final release version was a Frankensteinian abomination of competing creative visions, competing tones. Obvious reshoots with bloated Affleck and bad CGI-faced Cavill, incomplete effects, and color grading that didn't fit the designs. The resulting movie tanked at the box office and with reviewers worse than anyone had ever imagined it could, even in their worst of nightmares. The numbers spoke loud and clear. They would have been better off putting the Snyder Cut in theaters right away, because even if it had performed the same, that would have saved them the $100 million plus expenditure of the Whedon retooling. Jeff Johns and Peter Berg were fired, effective immediate. They never got to bask in the glory of the movies they themselves greenlit: Aquaman, Shazam, and Wonder Woman 1984. The Warner head honcho at the time, Kevin Tsujihara, was later ousted too for, well, complex private reasons which are worthy of a video of their own. But everyone else involved with the decision to retool the movie in such a disastrous fashion were still there, and if they were to approve the release of the Snyder Cut, and it turned out not to be the dumpster fire the Whedon Cut was, well, then they'd look pretty bad for their part in losing Warner all of that money. Warner Pictures chairman Toby Emmerich was among those decision makers, so that's some heavy resistance to the Snyder Cut right there. Then of course there was Walter Hamada, who took over the running of DC on film from Johns and Berg. He had nothing to do with Justice League, so none of this is on him. But by all accounts, he was also against the release of the Snyder Cut. Keep in mind, he was 2 regimes removed from Snyder's original vision for DC on film, and he was trying to chart out his own new direction for DC. Why would he want to have his efforts undercut by digging up the corpse of Justice League, a movie that directly or indirectly had toppled both previous regimes? In short, there was zero motivation within Warner's DC operation to release the Snyder Cut. Back in August, I said the only thing that would change their mind was a thriving DC cinematic universe. One in which the Snyder Cut could have been released essentially as a bonus feature that wouldn't pose any kind of a threat to the new universe that would have to be going strong. I stand by that. That is the only thing which would have changed the minds of Warner's DC operation about releasing the Snyder Cut. As Birds of Prey showed, we haven't got a thriving DC universe on film yet. So what happened? Why are we getting the Snyder Cut? Well, if it was up to Warner's DC operation, we wouldn't be getting the Snyder Cut. The decision to release it wasn't made by them. What I've been told is that everything changed in November of 2019. Not in Warner's DC operation. They still had no desire to release the Snyder Cut, for the aforementioned reasons. The change happened higher up in the corporate chain, in the highest levels of AT&T. November 12th saw the release of The Mandalorian, and overnight, Disney+, the streaming service of their corporate enemy, was turned into one of the major players in the streaming market. AT&T were monitoring that situation very closely. They needed a response, a Mandalorian of their own for HBO Max. What did they have that could be exploited to this end and create Mandalorian-level hype? This is when the attention turned to the Snyder Cut, and insiders with sympathies towards Zack Snyder were able to orchestrate a social media blitz, aimed at showing the powers that be at AT&T that there was a very real demand for the Snyder Cut, that it could be their response to The Mandalorian. The order to explore the possibilities of a Snyder Cut release and to facilitate it hence went down from AT&T to Warner and to Toby Emmerich, the aforementioned chairman of Warner Pictures. Toby Emmerich had previously greenlit every step that removed the Justice League from Snyder and transformed it into the disastrous Whedon Cut. So he was one of those who, shall we say, had not exactly championed the release of the Snyder Cut before, because releasing it would also make him look bad for his part in that whole affair. But now, the order to do so came from the highest corporate levels, rendering whatever objection anyone in the entire Warner and DC operation might have null and void. Because to AT&T, this isn't about the Justice League, or DC, or how badly they messed up before, or how a Snyder Cut release might undercut whatever the DC operation are doing right now, or planning for the future. This is all about pushing HBO Max. The current pandemic has shown exactly how big a deal that is, so everyone better get aboard with it. Shortly after the Snyder Cut was announced, The Hollywood Reporter released a paid-for puff piece, with a sanitized retelling of how Emmerich facilitated the release of the Snyder Cut with Zack and Deborah Snyder. How badly Warner screwed them over before, and screwed up in the process, isn't really covered. But now that the Snyder Cut is coming, courtesy of the powers that be at the highest level of AT&T, what form will the Snyder Cut take on HBO Max? As we've said before, the Snyder Cut in its current form is a work print, with incompleted effects, and it's still in need of ADR, final sound mix and color timing. Getting it into a releasable condition would cost tens of millions, and that money will indeed be allocated. But not to finish the Snyder Cut in its current form. In fact, the work print known as the Snyder Cut will never be finished up and released to the public. We'll be getting another Snyder Cut instead. As I said, AT&T don't so much want a movie as they want a Mandalorian of their own. To that end, the Snyder Cut is in need of some revision, a serialized revision. Everything is still in a state of flux, and nothing is hammered out as of yet. But what I'm hearing is that as of now, it looks like the starting point won't be the 2-hour-something current work print referred to as the Snyder Cut, but rather Snyder's 4-hour assembly cut. If deals can be worked out, more footage may be filmed to further beef this up, and then the whole ordeal might be released not as one movie, but split up into multiple chapters and released as an event miniseries, Mandalorian style. I have never been a fan of Snyder's direction for DC on film, but I will give it that there was one consistent vision behind it. With Justice League, that consistency was breached, and in the worst way possible. Today, with 2020 hindsight, it is clear that it would have been better to release Snyder's Justice League Part 1 all along. Who knows, maybe it would have done good enough to justify Part 2, or failing that, the New Gods could have been configured to function as a Part 2. Either way, the Whedon restructuring was the worst thing they could have done, and despite the success of Aquaman and the Joker, DC on film remains in something of a shambles today because of it. I think what they did to Snyder was a crime, and I am glad he will have his chance to conclude what he started. I don't expect the final Snyder Cut, in whichever form it may take, to be much better than the extended version of Batman v Superman. But that wasn't half bad, so I do expect it to be a huge step up from the Whedon cut. I am glad the Snyder Cut will be released, and I congratulate everyone fighting for it, and I think, in time, it will be considered the canon continuation of Batman v Superman, while the Whedon cut will be remembered as that weird alternate version of which we do not speak. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.